River project began in 1994 because we had an emphasis on what we called the last great places in Indiana. We called them Hoosier landscapes. And the Blue River is a true gem for several reasons. One is that it is primarily spring-fed. Everything is draining beneath the surface. When those cool waters reemerge in springs, that oxygen-rich environment is very good for the animals that live in there. And there are 100 species of freshwater fish in the Blue River. And in the Ohio River Basin and the Tennessee River Basin, we have the most diverse and rich fauna of freshwater mussels anywhere to be found on the planet. There are somewhere between 25 to 35 species that are in the Blue River. Contrast that with there are only 30 species known from the whole continent of Europe. And so that's a very rich resource. And it's also the last site in Indiana of the hellbender salamander. The hellbender is the largest salamander in the Western Hemisphere. It approaches 2 feet in length. I describe it sometimes as looking like mud come to life. I like to say that everything we've got to conserve here is ugly. I mean, what do we have? We have Allegheny wood rats, bats, and hellbender salamanders. Those are sort of our 3 flagship species, and those things aren't viewed as charismatic animals. And we don't have things that are magnificent in the way of landscapes. We don't have the ocean, we don't have the spectacular mountains either, and yet these forests are very rich, and these lands have many species that are beautiful in their own way and significant. But there's so much more to the Blue River area than just the river. Right here along the Blue River, there are caves which are ideally suited to Indiana bat hibernation. Approximately 1/3 of the world's population of the federally endangered Indiana bat hibernate in these caves. And so that's extremely significant on a global scale. If we just protected those sites where they hibernate, it would not be sufficient because bats aren't in the cave all year. They live most of the year out in the forest. They need a certain number of large, dead or dying trees where they can get beneath the bark, thermoregulate themselves to stay warm. And so there is a larger degree of sensitivity now in managing forests and the animals that are fully adapted to that environment. One of the things that attracts me to the Nature Conservancy is the philosophy of looking for common solutions. And that sometimes can stretch us and make us think in very creative ways. Traditionally, our work had been that we would go out and talk to landowners about selling their land to us so that we could create nature preserves and then manage them ourselves. But of course, not everyone's interested in selling their land. And so we came up with this idea of giving people a financial incentive to manage their land in such a way that it had a real conservation focus. The Forest Bank is a program of the Nature Conservancy. The purpose was to encourage private landowners who own these forest tracts to think about managing them in a better way than they may have otherwise.
My name is Pete Schickel. I lived there all my life. Joanne, my wife, is my partner for 61 years. We thought that would be an opportunity as a good investment to enroll in the Forest Bank, and they managed the timber cutting, and it was something we didn't have time or didn't know how to do it. One reason we're in the Forest Bank, we feel like there's a need to preserve our forest land. There's a lot of things we don't know about forest, and there's where we depend on the Forest Bank professionals to give us expertise on forest management.
Pete and I believe sincerely that it's our moral responsibility to leave whatever we own as a better place than what it was when we found it. And you should take care of what you've got and make it better for whoever's going to follow after you. People's going to follow us. And
Show a good example, I guess. Or try to.
The amount of public land here is less than 3% across the whole state. These places are owned by private individuals. Many of them will sell to us, but some of them, the land is very important to them, and they want it as a legacy. So we have to work with them because much of the biological riches of this area rest still on private lands.
This property has been in the Rothrock name for probably 185 years. My great-great-grandfather built the first sawmill, and then his two sons built the second mill. I think it was like 1856, and that was still the mill that I remember growing up here as a child. When I was probably in high school, we cleared some property up on top of the hill there that we could use for hay, probably 7 or 8 acres. You went in and tilled it and cleaned it by hand. And so when you put that kind of work into land, you get a pretty strong allegiance to it. So I've inherited that allegiance to the land, and even my sons have that same allegiance to the land. There's just something about preserving it and keeping it in the Rothrock name. The Nature Conservancy would like to purchase some of this property here because it's along Blue River. So we were having a conversation about that, should we? And my oldest son said, you know, do you think we should sell? He said, your ancestors would come out of their graves and get you if you talked about that. Alan came out and we toured the property, and he has that same kind of allegiance to that. He doesn't want to see it develop and homes put in and this sort of thing. And basically it's to preserve property and wildlife habitat, like to say for the bats. So it's not economics at all with us. You look at it strictly from an economic point of view, I'd sell the whole thing and take the money and bank it and live off a hog and travel and do whatever you want to do. But I think most of it to me is just preserving the history of this area and the Rothrock family in general and their achievements.
That landowner has a very rich sense of history, and the land and his family cannot easily be unwoven. And so the land is valuable to him because his family is valuable to him. Here in southern Indiana, where the culture is very conservative, and change sometimes comes slowly, there still lies beneath all of that something of a land ethic. People have lived and taken their living from the land for generations. And there is this sense that the land gives us what we have. And if we don't conserve it, then we won't have what we've had in the past. Over time, I've been surprised how many people and partners really are sincere about wanting to try to do the right thing.
My husband and I bought this land in '65, and it was quite a thrill when we found additionally that the glade was here. When my husband first got sick in 1981, he made a determination that he definitely wanted to preserve the land. And we did then donate the land to the Nature Conservancy. So it was really important to us, and an added bonus that when we could give them the land, that we could also give them part of this glade. It's important to preserve things that basically are disappearing. When they're gone forever. And that's such a sin. When I walk through these woods, I just feel so close to nature. I feel close to the earth. I feel a part of the earth. It wasn't a sacrifice for us to give this land. It wasn't a sacrifice at all. It was giving back. It was giving back.
What is it about the human spirit that likes wild places? What is it about us as humans that like knowing that there are places where animals and birds and wild things still persist? Is it a built-in desire and reflection of the Creator that we see in creation that somehow is down deep in us? Is it something just peaceful about knowing that there are things that are timeless? And in this hurried society in which we live, the timelessness of wild places is comforting to us and brings us peace. Maybe there's some romantic notion that centuries ago no one knew the limits of the earth, but today the earth seems so small, and we yearn for that time again where there were places that were unexplored and there were places we can be away again and lost from what otherwise is so harried and rushed in our lives.